improving on these webinars. I want to thank Shannon for being here. So Shannon is a keynote speaker and workshop leader on a mission to empower business professionals like ourselves to communicate clearly, lead confidently, and intentionally grow their organizations. Known for her down-to-earth humor and real-world insights, Shannon has 30 plus years of experience working with leaders from companies, private clubs, associations, nonprofit, and even Congress to deliver clear, compelling messages that get results. She also holds a master's degree in professional communication and leadership. As much as she loves speaking, her favorite roles are being a wife to her husband, Ed, and a mother to her three grown children, Natalie, Jacqueline, and James. Please welcome Shannon Cannon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We are here today to talk about how to ace your communication and transform your leadership. Briefly, here is our agenda for the day. We are going to talk about the ACE framework. Then we'll go over a learning conversation blueprint, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Now, that being said, during this session, I will ask some of you if you're interested to come off of mute and participate in the magic phrases that we're going to go over. But questions, put them in the chat or wait until the end for that so that we can get through all of the information. So before I start on the ACE framework, I'd like to touch on the idea of this concept of leadership. And if you had asked me more than 30 years ago when I started my career what a leader was, I would have answered with 100% authority. And knowing what I know now, it turns out I would have been 100% wrong, because I thought power and authority was what leadership was about. And I thought you had to have that corner office and you had to have the dedicated parking spot to be a leader. What I have since learned is that anyone who can influence and inspire is a leader. So we are leading other people every single day, and we have the opportunity to affect people every single day just by the virtue of being alive and being able to influence, inspire other people. The other thing I've realized is that we are all leaders in our own lives. We led ourselves to this webinar today. So we are already leading and we are already influencing and inspiring others. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we do that a little bit more confidently, a little bit more clearly, and a little bit more concisely so that we can lead better and help other people more. So we're going to talk about 3 powerful communication strategies, and you can remember them with the acronym ACE. The A stands for alignment, the C stands for curiosity, and the E stands for empathy. And I'd like to talk a little bit about a personal story before I get started on these concepts. So 21 years ago, our family was living in Okinawa, Japan, and that's a little island just off the coast of China. My husband and I had been married for 10 years, and our kids were 2, 4, and 6 years old. And I thought it would be a great idea to take a trip to China. So one night at dinner, I said to Ed, hey, I'd really like to take a trip to China. I've always wanted to climb the Great Wall, and I'm not sure what else we would do. What do you think? And he said, I'd prefer not to go to China. Okay, now this is a question where I want you to come off mute and actually answer the question. When you heard that phrase, I'd prefer not to go to China, what did you all hear? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and see who's coming off the screen, off the mute.
I heard I'm not going to China.
Okay, who heard something else?
Same thing.
Same thing?
Sounds like there's a possibility.
See, so we're all hearing different things, right? Let me tell you what I heard. I heard I'd prefer not to go to China, but I love you so much and I want to make you happy that we will go to China. So without getting clarification on what that statement meant, I went ahead and planned a trip to China. Now, remember, this was 20 years ago, and the internet was not nearly as robust as it is today. So I spent a lot of time and energy planning that trip to China. So a couple of nights later, we're back at dinner. I said, hey, Ed, I've planned our trip to China and I'd like to review it with you. And he looked at me like some of you may have, like I had 3 heads. And he said, I thought I told you I didn't want to go to China. And I said, no, you said you prefer not to go to China. So after a bit of a discussion, which some of us may know as a fight, we agreed that we wouldn't go to China. So if I had known then what I know now about these 3 concepts, we never would have had that discussion because I would have gotten aligned, I'd have been curious, and I have been empathetic. So it's safe to say I've learned a lot over the last several decades about how to be a better communicator. And that's why I'm excited to share this with you. So starting with the concept of alignment. Here's the thing about alignment. We have 3 kinds of conversations all day, every day. And sometimes we're using these conversations within one interaction. So the first kind is a practical conversation. The second is an emotional conversation. And the third is a social conversation. And we'll review what these are so we can understand them a little bit more. The key point about knowing that there's these different kinds of conversations is that we have to align on the conversation that's happening, or we really won't get clear communication. So practical conversations. This is when we are making plans together, we're solving problems, or we're just making a decision. So for example, we are talking in the office about where we want to go for lunch, or we are talking about which vendor we're going to choose for this next project. It's a practical discussion. Emotional conversations are where I tell you what I'm feeling, or you tell me what you're feeling, and we don't want any practical problem solving. We just want people to listen. So a great example of this in the office is when someone comes to you and says, I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately because I have so much on my plate. Or a coworker comes to you and says, I've been having a really tough time lately because my pet is sick. That is an emotional conversation. Social conversations are how we relate to each other and society and the identities that are important to us. So for instance, you might be talking to a coworker and talking about what you're going to be doing this weekend. Or an example is just before y'all got on the call, we were talking about my last name Ganon and how it's of French origin. And it was from my husband's side of the family. So those are examples of social conversations. So again, we need to align on the kind of conversation that is happening in order to communicate. This is the crux of the problem. If people come to you in an emotional conversation state and you respond practically, that's where we have problems. Perfect example of this, and I'll bet there's no one on this call who has not experienced this. You come home from work and you just want to complain about how hard your day is, and your spouse or your significant other says, well, why don't you try doing this to fix it? And all of a sudden a fight starts. That's because you're not lining up on the type of conversation. So if someone's coming at you emotionally, you have to respond, at least to start, with an emotional response. Again, the solution, you create alignment. Practical conversation should have a practical response. Emotional conversation should have an emotional response, at least to start. And we'll go over tricks to transition into a practical conversation if that's where we need to get. And finally, social conversations need to be met with a social start. So for instance, when you start meetings and you have a little bit of the chit chat at the beginning, that's normal. And we have to do that to get aligned. And then the leader of the meeting can transition to the practical agenda once that happens. Again, meaningful communication occurs when we connect. And if we don't connect, we won't have meaningful conversations. That's what we need to remember about this. So in order to get that connection, that meaningful conversation going, we can use a magic phrase. And the magic phrase is, it seems like. So this is called labeling. And it's a great way to make sure you are having the same kind of conversation and to make sure that you are aligned. So here's how labeling works. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is identify the sentiment and just label it with "it seems like." And then here's the tricky part. This is the part that a lot of people mess up because it's a little bit harder than you'd think. Close your mouth and listen. Again, identify what you think is happening, label it, and then close your mouth and listen. So here are some things that would work for different kinds of conversations. It seems like you want to discuss your work hours. That would be an example of a practical conversation. If someone is coming into your office to discuss your work hours, they'll say, yes, I do. So you know you're going to talk about your work hours. Here's another example. It seems like you're angry about this situation. You're dang right I'm angry. And they go on. That is an emotional conversation. And by identifying that and aligning with the type of conversation that person wants to have, you're going to start the conversation and start communicating. It seems like you're looking forward to the weekend. That's an example of a social conversation. So once again, labeling works because it provides validation. People just want to be heard. When you let people talk and share what they're thinking or feeling or looking forward to, you are going to be a better leader because you are going to be the kind of person who listens to understand. One of the most common questions I get when I do these workshops is, what do you do about those negative Nellies who just never have anything good to say? This is the best thing you can do for negative Nellies, is to just say, it seems like, and let them talk. When we talk about curiosity, we'll get to the next thing we want to say. For now, it's very important that you just understand that you want to let people talk and get aligned on that first opening kind of conversation. Now, I've got a little bit of a power tip for you that I'd like to share, and this is it. Please try to avoid the word "I understand," because there is no way that we can possibly understand how someone else feels. We are all experiments of one. We are all on our own journey and have our own backgrounds and our own experiences. So when someone says to me, I can understand how you feel, you're going to think, no, you don't. You can't possibly understand how I feel. You have a different way of looking at it. So instead of "I understand," try to replace that phrase with "I can see." So instead of "I understand how you're feeling," I can see how you feel that way, given what you were going through at the time. Or another way to say it would be, that makes sense, given your background. Or I hear what you're saying, and I'd like to work with you on this so we don't have the same issues going forward. So again, just think of a different way to avoid saying "I understand." Another word to try to eradicate from your vocabulary is "but." I understand how you're feeling, but we need to fix this. What did you just happen to you? Most likely, just saying it, I just started kind of backing up, because when I hear that, I think, oh no, here it comes. So if we avoid "I understand" and using the word "but" and replace it with "I can see how you're feeling, and we need to figure out how to fix this going forward," that is much more inviting than "I understand what you're feeling, but we got to figure this out." So those are some pro tips there. Avoid "I understand" and try to get rid of the word "but" and use the word "and" instead. So now we are going to practice as a group. So we're going to have a couple of people volunteer to say this one phrase, and then the rest of us I'd love it if you came off mute to practice this because we're going to hear the different ways people say it. All we're going to do is label it with it seems like. So let me stop sharing. So an example is I'm going to say it one way, and I'd love someone else to come off mute and say it the other way. So when I say it's my birthday next week, I want you to identify the emotion I'm showing. Okay, let's give it a shot. On your mark, get set. It's my birthday next week. Who's
Excited.
coming off mute?
Excited.
Yes, it sounds like you're excited. Very good. All right, who wants to give it another shot with a different way of saying it's my birthday? Anyone?
I'm turning 50 next week.
It seems like you're neutral about it.
Correct.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So that's the first thing we want to do when we are working on communicating with people is getting aligned with them. Now, a lot of the time, especially if you have been practicing this leadership thing or you've been in the workforce for a while and you've been managing people, you might not even need to say this statement out loud. You might just be able to think in your head, okay, it seems like this person needs to have an emotional conversation, so I'm just going to listen. And that's totally normal. This really works to say it out loud when you're just not sure what the person's feeling. There's no harm in saying it seems like you're a little bit angry about the situation. Just give that person a chance to make sure you're on the same page with the kind of conversation you're having. So again, that A stands for alignment. And the magic phrase is, it seems like. If you can get aligned on the kind of conversation you're having, you are going to have a better chance of actually having a decent conversation and communicating well. All right. The second part of being an exceptional communicator is using curiosity. The C stands for curiosity. All right, so here is a question for everybody just to think about. Have you all heard the term curiosity killed the cat? I see some heads shaking. Here is the second part to that phrase. Most people don't know there's a second part. The second part is satisfaction brought him back. And I love knowing that. I did not learn that second part until I was in college. Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought him back. So people treat curiosity sometimes as a negative thing. They think of it as being nosy, or they think of it as being none of my business. But here's the thing about curiosity. It's really a superpower when it's done right. When I was preparing this program for the local YMCA, I was talking to one of the managers and she was explaining to me that they had a dad who was bringing in a baby who was kind of dirty. It was a newborn and he was not bringing in enough diapers or enough formula. And so instead of just telling the dad, listen, you got to get a little bit better at this or we're going to have to kick you out of the daycare, the manager got a little curious and said, what's going on? Can we help in any way? And the dad said, well, here's the thing. My wife is suffering from postpartum depression. I am working the night shift and it's everything I can do to get home and get the baby here so I can go home and help my wife. So what the YMCA did was said, oh my heavens, let's help you figure this out. So they had him bring in extra clothes, extra diapers for just a couple of months. And they took on the extra responsibility of caring for this baby. So flash forward a couple of months and things were getting better at home and things started to improve for that family. Now, just imagine what might have happened if that worker had not gotten curious. Who knows? That's why I say curiosity is a superpower, and it is one of the best things you can do as a leader to be a better leader and to be a better communicator is to be curious about why things are happening and not to think you know everything. So there's two key concepts with curiosity. The first one is active listening, And the second one is asking open-ended questions. So active listening. My mom was right, bless her soul. She always said, Shannon, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should listen more and talk less. So here are some tips for active listening. The number one thing you can do when someone is talking to you is be fully present. And in this day and age, the best thing you can do to be fully present, I'm sure y'all can guess it. Take this phone and put it away. Put it off to the side, turn it upside down. If you're at your desk, put your keyboard away so you're not tempted to type. Or better yet, turn off your screen or close your laptop so you're not even looking at it. I've had the opportunity in my lifetime, and it just made me think of this week with Jesse Jackson passing, of meeting Jesse Jackson decades ago when I worked on Capitol Hill. And he and John Glenn were 2 people that I have met who everyone knows they have charisma. And all charisma is paying attention and looking someone in the eyes and truly listening. I was, when I met them both, a page in the Senate. I was 16 years old. I literally was a nobody, just in working as a page. And they both took the time to look me in the eye and say hello and listen for just a maybe 30 seconds. That I remember because I thought, these guys get it. They are so smart. They're listening to me. This is what's key to being a leader. Pay attention and be fully present. Avoid interrupting. This is so hard when we're in a hurry, and this is my Achilles tendon. If you're listening, you're not talking. So remember that we are not trying to put words in people's mouths. We're trying to let them explain how they are feeling, or at least give them a chance to get out what they have to say. Keep an open mind. I think if everybody did this, we wouldn't have the politics and division we're having. I'd like to propose a phrase that you might want to try to use. This is not one of my magic phrases. It's just a bonus. You might be right. If someone says something that you completely disagree with, what if you just said, you might be right? I truly think that there are so few things that are actually right and wrong. We just have a difference of opinion. Our perception, how we see the world, is never wrong, which gets me back to when we say, I understand. You can't understand because I'm telling you from my point of view. So if you keep an open mind, you can say, you might be right because someone's seen it differently than you. And finally, manage your emotions when you're listening. Emotions do belong in the workplace. Emotionality does not. Those are the keys to active listening. We have to remember this. A conversation is not a debate. Nobody wins a conversation. Now, I know this is an audience of mostly men. And as men, you might have thought, I'm not so sure I agree with that. And I want to explain the difference between how men and women think about conversation, just so we're aware of it. Because of the way we are socially conditioned, not necessarily because of biological differences, just because of the way we are raised, all around the world, in the United States, all throughout history, little girls play with little girls and little boys play in groups of little boys. There's some mix and match, but generally growing up, think back to as you were growing up, did you mostly play with kids of the same gender? And the answer is probably yes. Here's the thing. Men talk for status. Women talk for connection. And that is because of the social conditioning we experienced. So women growing up, we like smaller groups. We focus on intimacy and equality. We are working to cooperate. Men, on the other hand, tend to play in larger groups and focus on independence and hierarchy. Men are thinking one up and one down. Who's the leader? Who's the follower? Where do I fit in this hierarchy? So there's not a right or wrong to either way of thinking. I just want us to be aware that there is a difference. So women, When you are sitting in a meeting and expect to wait for men to call on you to be heard because that's how it works with a group of women, stop waiting and find a moment to jump in and say what you think. Men, if you are in a group of mostly women and you find yourself talking more than 50% of the time, throttle back and understand that women talk differently. Again, it's not right or wrong. It's just two different ways of seeing the world. There's also a difference between introverts and extroverts. Introverts spend a lot of energy thinking about how they are doing things. Extroverts, on the other hand, just go about and do them. So if you're communicating with an introvert and asking questions, you are going to need to wait a little bit longer to get the answers because they need a little more time to process the questions. Introverts, if this is you and you're constantly thinking about how well you're doing something, the best advice I can give you is to just focus on what you're doing and not how well you're doing it. It's easier said than done, I know, but I just don't know any other way to say it. You just have to focus on what you're doing. Another little trick is the 8-second rule. When you ask a question, give people at least 8 seconds to answer. When I just asked you to get off mute and ask a question, I was counting in my head to 8. And it seems like an interminably long time. You will find that you get more comfortable with that the more you practice it. All right. Second thing about listening is asking open-ended questions. These are questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. These are the kind of questions you want to get into the habit of asking. So you're going to get a deeper discussion if you are asking what instead of a yes or no question. Here's some examples. Instead of, did you learn anything new? What's something you heard today that made you stop and think differently about your work? This is a great way to ask the question at the dinner table. Instead of, did you learn anything new in school? What did you learn in math class today? Now, you still might get the nothing, which, believe me, I've gotten with 3 children. At the same time, you at least have a possibility of getting some answers out of those kids. This is my favorite question not to ask at the end of the meeting. Do you have any questions? The women are going to wait because they want to make sure everybody else has had a chance to be heard. And the men are going to be taking over the conversation, or the introverts are going to be still thinking about the questions they want to ask, and the extroverted leader is moving on. So here's the trick with the end of the meeting question. What questions do you have about what's happening right now? Or what questions do you have that I didn't address? So instead of do you have any questions, phrase it a different way and then count to 8. So you're wrapping up a meeting, and instead of saying, do you have any questions? You're going to say, what other questions do you have that we didn't address? If you wait those 8 seconds, you can bet that the introverts have had enough time and the women have had enough time. So you can feel safe moving on after those 8 seconds when you ask that nice what question. This is the magic phrase we want to use to show curiosity. And if there's one thing you take away from this workshop today, this is the phrase I would love for you to remember. Tell me more. This is the phrase you want to use as many times as possible during a conversation to get to the root of the issue. This is the phrase that I would love for you to start using after you've identified what kind of conversation you're having to make you a better leader and a better listener. So there's other ways to say, tell me more. You don't have to just say, tell me more. You could say a little bit more about how you see things. What information do you have that I might not? How do you see it differently? This is a good one. Say a little bit more about who you think is at fault. That's going to give you some answers. And then say more about why this is important to you. Using these kinds of questions is going to get you to a deeper understanding of what's going on. So let's do a little bit more practice, if we don't mind. I would love for someone to share a thought about why you love your job. And then the rest of us are just going to say, tell me more. I'm going to stop sharing. So here's what happens when we have these conversations. When you're talking to someone, they'll tell you something and your immediate reaction is to say, oh, I love that part of my job too. And then you take over the conversation and you're no longer listening. You are becoming the hero of the journey and the person you're speaking to no longer feels heard. So the goal here is to just learn how to say, tell me more. So can I get one person to volunteer to say something that you love about your job? I see Lindsay's hand raised. Go ahead and go off mute and say something.
I love the constant support and innovation that we are allotted to have at my job.
Okay, so now everybody, all you're going to say is tell me more. So 1, 2, 3. Tell me more. So that's when Lindsay would say a little bit more. And then as a leader, if you're trying to get to the root of an issue, if you say it maybe one more time or two more times, you will get to a deeper understanding of what's going on. So Lindsay, thank you for volunteering. I don't want to cut you off, but I want to move on to the third concept, which is empathy. So sharing my screen again. Here's the thing about empathy. It is not sympathy and it's not agreement. Empathy is the ability to be aware of and share the feelings of others. Here's the key phrase, without necessarily agreeing with them. That is so important to being a good leader and to showing empathy, because you don't have to agree with people to see how they can feel the way they feel. We are all, again, experiments of one, and our perception is never wrong. So think of it this way. Think about putting on someone else's shoes and seeing the world from their point of view and not trying to make those shoes mold to your feet. I chose these wingtips because when I was a kid, my dad is well, he's passed now, but he was a banker. And he was a tall guy. He was 6'4". He had big feet, 13 triple E. So he had Allen Edmonds shoes, wingtips. One pair was black, one pair was brown. That's all he wore. And I loved when I was a kid to put my feet in his shoes and glomp around the house in them, because it made me feel big and tall like my dad. And it made me think I can see the world from this big, tall, strong man's point of view. That is empathy. I was trying to be aware of and share his feelings without actually being him. That's what we're talking about here, and why empathy is important, because we can see things from other people's point of view. Another thing to know about empathy is that if you want to communicate effectively, you have to use both content and emotion. Remember I said earlier, you don't want to be emotional, but you do need emotion. This is what I'm talking about. People make decisions, and effective communication works by both talking about facts and feelings. The more and more behavioral scientists learn about how people make decisions, people will tell you they make decisions based on the content and emotions don't come into effect at all. But when you hook people up to the machines that measure your brain waves, what they've shown is that people make decisions based on the emotions, and then they back them up with facts. So effective communication has to use both content and emotion to be effective. That's the key that I want us to remember. Another important thing about empathy is nonverbal communication, how you show up. So let's talk a little bit about this. What is your body language saying? This kind of is saying, I'm not interested in what you have to say. If someone's talking to you, open up a little bit and show that you're receptive. Make eye contact. Again, what I said about John Glenn and Jesse Jackson, eye contact is key to being a good leader. Your stance is important. How you show up and stand confidently matters. So you want to put your feet about hip distance, lift up through your knees, and lead with your hips. So you're standing nice and tall. Gestures matter. You don't want to be an automaton, but you don't want to be flying everywhere and distracting people with too much motion. Facial expressions matter. How you sit makes a difference. So if you need a little practice, use your videotape or use a mirror just to see how you show up in meetings and in life. And finally, your tone of voice matters. I'm going to take us off of the presentation so we can practice something about learning about the tone of our voice. So let me stop sharing. All right, everybody, I'd love for you to grab a pencil or a pen. And let me tell you what we're going to do. You don't have to come off mute for this. I'm going to be talking so you can hear me. We're going to put a pencil in our mouth like this. Grab it with your teeth. And then what I want you to do is say your name. Say, hi, my name is. Then say your name 3 times and project your voice under the pencil. So let me demonstrate. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. Okay, so go ahead and give it a try. Say it 3 times. I'm going to do it and then we'll switch it. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. So what you likely notice about your face is that it drooped down, that you felt a little negative, and that it was a little sad. So now for tone of voice, I'd like you to project your voice over the straw or over the pencil or over the pen and see what happens with your face. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. Hi, my name is Shannon Gannon. You'll notice the difference. So when you're trying to talk with people and get them enthused about a project or just have a regular conversation, you generally want to be speaking over the pencil. If it's a more serious conversation, you probably want to take it under the pencil to show that gravitas. Your tone of voice matters. All right, so let's go back to the presentation. Hold on a sec. I just messed up with where we are. Let me just get back to where we are. Here we are. So the nonverbals matter, how we show up. All right. Stop sharing one more time. See if I can make this work. Hold on. There we go. All right. So I've said this all along. Perception is never wrong. That's something that we have to remember about clear communication. The way we see the world is unique to ourselves, and it is never, ever wrong. The great way to show that you are on the same page and you have empathy is called looping for understanding. This is briefly restating the key points to ensure that you understand what was just said. The magic phrase to loop for understanding is what I heard you say. This is a great way to show people that you've been listening and that you know what the next steps are. This was demonstrated to me time and time again when I worked at a private residential community. I would be in board meetings and we had 9 different board members, and our general manager would end a conversation with, okay, so what I heard you say is you'd like me to talk to the food and beverage manager to see if we can get another server on evenings. And then one board member would say, no, 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 that's not quite right. I think you should talk to the food and beverage director. We should use the same people, but we want to expand the hours another half hour. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you're happy with the staffing. We just need a little bit longer hours. Is that right? Yes, that's right. If you don't do that looping for understanding, that's where the problems start. So if you think back to my conversation with my husband, if I would have said, okay, so what I heard you say is you prefer not to go to China, but we will go because I really want to go, I would have avoided that whole debacle of planning a trip and then not going. So what I heard you say is key to looping for understanding. So a little bit of practice. I hope I can get a volunteer to share a thought about what your key takeaway is so far today. And then the rest of us are just going to reflect back using the phrase, what I heard you say. So you don't have to come off of mute to say what I heard you say, but could I get someone to come off of mute to share a key learning from today so we can all practice?
What I heard you say is I don't listen well to my wife.
So what you're saying is you have to listen better to your wife. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
You heard me say that correctly.
Yes, all right. We're gonna have to send this to her. All right, so that's a perfect example. Just rephrase what people say just to make sure you're on the same page. It goes so far to making sure that you're working together. This is really great when you are talking to the boss, and especially y'all, if you have a boss who will tell you one thing and then 2 days later he says, no, I didn't say that. If you get into this habit of saying, okay, what I'm hearing you say is you'd like me to get that report to you by Friday at noon. Is that correct? And then if he says, no, I need it Friday at 9 because I want to go away at noon, then you know. Then you follow up with an email saying, per our conversation, I'll get that to you Friday at 9. If you don't do that looping for understanding, he says to you, give me that report by Friday. You're thinking 5 o'clock or noon. He's thinking 9 a.m. It's a great way to communicate better with the people you work with. Now, here's another little tip. If you are managing up, that works. But what if you are managing down and you want to make sure you have, say you have a new employee and you want to make sure that they get what you're saying? This is where tone of voice matters. So just to make sure we're clear, or just to make sure we're on the same page, what did you hear me say? That's another way to use looping for understanding, to give the person a chance to reiterate what you think you said. This is really helpful if you're a newer manager, because then you can make sure that you are saying things clearly. I can't emphasize enough, though, how important it is to be very careful about the tone of voice you use for this. And you might want to think of saying, oh, now I'm new to this management thing, or in my head, I'm perfectly clear, and yet I sometimes am not. So can you just help me out and make sure we're on the same page? What did you hear me say? What's the next step? That's going to help loop for understanding and make sure that you're showing that empathy and that you're being a good leader. All right, so let's recap real quick. We've got these 3 powerful communication strategies: alignment, and the magic phrase is it seems like; curiosity is tell me more; and empathy is what I heard you say. So if we remember those 3 phrases, you are going to be a better communicator. I think tell me more is one of the most important ones you can remember. So let's put all this into action. I want us to remember that there will be conflict in offices, because if your team has the right composition, every person will be fighting for something unique. So we want to shift from a mindset of conflict avoidance or confrontation to one of conflict resolution. And here's my learning conversation blueprint. Again, the acronym is ACE. You anchor the conversation in neutral facts, you collaborate on solutions, and then you execute with clear next steps. ACE. Couple of things to remember that will summarize what we talked about. There is no right or wrong in general. Now, unless it's a safety issue, for sure there's a right or wrong. But if you're talking about how the toilet paper should go, over or under, not right or wrong, just different. Your goal with these conversations is to find mutual purpose and not blame. You're not a detective on a TV show. Do not present your story as the truth. Remember, we can see things more than one way, and our perception is never wrong. Focus on someone's behavior, not their whole person. Avoid those terms always and never. And then whenever you have a conversation or an issue, remember that if there's two people involved, there are two sides to the story. And no matter how small you think your contribution is, you have to own your little slice of the cake. And then finally, use the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And remember our magic phrases. It seems like, tell me more, and what I heard you say. So here's some real world conversation starters of conversations that might be a little difficult, and here's how we get them started. So a team member is resisting a new procedure. Using that model, anchoring the conversation in facts, here's how we can maybe start this conversation. It seems like this new process is creating some frustration. Can we talk through what feels unclear or challenging? You're not putting blame. You're not calling them names. You're just saying something neutral and you're anchoring it in facts. It seems like this new process is creating some frustration. You might want to say, I noticed you didn't fulfill the procedure the way we had talked about last week. So when you're leading the conversation, you have to think of yourself as a mediator and as part of the conversation. So think of yourself as wearing stripes with being a referee, but you're also in the conversation. So you're not committing to your side. You're listening and making sure that you're giving some room for learning. Okay, scenario 2. If you have a team member who frequently arrives late, you're going to want to have some facts on how often he has arrived late. And instead of getting in his face and saying, you have to stop arriving late or you're going to be fired, have a conversation. I'd like to talk about your recent arrival time so we can understand what's going on and find a solution that works for both of us. I can't tell you how many times in my career it has not been an intentional thing of being late. It's been kids getting them off to school. I don't know why someone wouldn't just go to their boss and say, hey, listen, I need to change my time or I'm having an issue, but people don't. So if you start from a neutral point of view and work together, you're going to have a better outcome. Scenario 3, you have a different management style than a coworker, and this has been causing issues in the office. You decide that you are going to rise above it and start the conversation. How might you start that conversation? It seems like we approach leadership differently. And I'd love to understand how you see things so we can find a way that supports both of us and the team. Neutral, anchoring it in facts, inviting the conversations you can collaborate on a solution together and then eventually execute it. Finally, here is a chance to get these slides. If you would please take a moment to get out your phone and scan this QR code. I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes and then we'll go on to the Q&A and we'll have about 8 minutes for Q&A. So when you scan this code, it's going to take you to a little survey. When you fill that out, you'll have access to the slides at the end. Okay, and when you're done, if you can just put done in the chat, we'll make sure most people are done before we go to the Q&A. All right. Y'all, I know this was really fast and I threw a lot of information at you. So now is a chance to get clarity on anything that I may not have addressed that you have questions on. If you have any conversation that you're facing or any questions about working with coworkers that you'd like to ask, I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat if that's more comfortable for you, or you can come off mute and ask the question and we can have a conversation.
I'll just make a comment that I appreciated the talk. I appreciated one of the earlier signs when it page where it had the equal sign and trying to put people in the same headspace and in some ways, whether it's manager to employee or employee to manager, that it puts those on more equal terms and it doesn't feel so one-sided.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more. So I did mention briefly, so people may start on an emotional front. And if you're, especially if you're in a service industry or if you've got an employee who's upset when they come into the office. So if you get in the habit of identifying how people are, if they come into you emotionally, it's hard, I know, to deal with emotions. And if you just say, tell me more, and then they'll say a little bit more about what's going on. And then if you say it again, tell me more, let them get it out of their system and then transition into the practical conversation using what we said. We're not going to say, I understand how you feel that way. So we'll say, I can see how you feel that way. And let's go ahead and talk about what we can do to fix this going forward. So you got to let people have those emotions. Same thing. If you're a person who likes to be really emotionally connected and someone comes into your office and says, hey, listen, I'm in a hurry. I need to get this contract signed. You already agreed with it on email. Here's the paper. Will you please sign it? You know that that is a practical conversation and you shouldn't say, oh, hey, tell me how your kids are doing before I sign this. That is going to be annoying to the person who just wants to get the thing done. So match that emotion, match that practicality, match that social discussion, and then gently move people on with, I can see how you feel that way. And let's now talk about what we can do about it. That's going to make your conversations much more smooth. And quite frankly, just you're going to be a better leader because you're going to know how to identify with people and empathize with them. Any other questions or comments? That was a full 8 seconds, so I think we're good.
I was just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yes, so let me go ahead. I want to make sure everybody has my contact information. Oh, let me go back one step. Action planning. Y'all, I'm sure you've heard this a million times when you do these programs. This is all fun and games until you actually make an action plan. Pick one thing we talked about today and plan to use it today. Maybe with your spouse, maybe with your children, maybe with your coworker that you don't get along with. Maybe you decide I'm going to be brave and start that conversation. Maybe you just say, today I'm going to say, tell me more when I don't want to listen. That's going to make you a better leader and a better communicator. So pick one thing, please pick one thing and try it on for size and see if it works, because it's the doing that makes a difference. I love the Nike slogan, just do it, but I wish it was just do something, because that's how you improve. You do something, you make a plan. And then here's my contact information if anyone wants to get in touch. I'm happy to answer any questions via email, and that's my mobile number. I always give it out. If you want to text me or call me, I'm happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.